This is Agent Provocateur with Allan Walsh and Adam Wylde.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Agent Provocateur. I'm Allan Walsh with Adam Wylde. How are you, Adam?
I'm great, Allan. I'm excited about today's episode.
Today, we have a very special guest, Mike Liut, who is the managing director of Octagon Hockey. With me, I've worked closely with Mike since 2004, working as agents together. Mike works with players like Leon Draisaitl, Mikko Rantanen, and a whole bunch of other players that is represented by Octagon Hockey. Mike had a 13-year NHL career where he was widely recognized as one of the best goaltenders in hockey. He was voted by NHL players the league's most valuable player in 1981, winning what was then called the Lester B. Pearson Trophy. A guy named Wayne Gretzky came in second. He was involved as a player in the NHLPA as executive vice president and was there on the scene during the historic moment of the 1992 NHL players strike. Upon retiring from the NHL, Mike went to law school, became a lawyer, passed the state bar exam, and went to work with the NHLPA and Bob Goodenow as associate counsel. Recently, we heard the devastating news of Bob Goodenow's passing at 72 years of age. People of my vintage who knew Bob well and considered Bob a friend and watched the rise of the NHLPA from the back room of Allan Eagleson's law offices to what it became. It truly is a remarkable story, and the remarkable accomplishments and vision and determination of Bob Goodenow. And there's no better person to discuss the life and legacy of Bob than Mike, who worked closely with Bob during some of the seminal moments in NHLPA history, both on and off the ice. So without further ado, let's welcome together Mike Liut to the show. Mike, welcome to Agent Provocateur. It's great to see you.
Yeah, it's been I don't know. It's been a while. It hasn't been a while. It's taken me a while to get the invite.
Well, it's only season 5, and we're up to about 90 episodes now.
Yeah. You gotta check my birthday.
As everyone can tell, I'm in LA, so the sirens will be going off every 5 minutes during the episode. But you know what the hell? How are you doing?
Yeah, doing well. Right, we're just all getting ready for another wild hockey season. Pun intended. Actually,
pun intended.
Yeah.
We've recently come across some devastatingly sad news: the passing of Bob Goodenow, which hit you particularly hard. I knew Bob and was a friend of Bob, but nowhere near the connection that you had with him for so many years. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Bob and your history with him?
Yeah, Bob and I go back the better part of almost 40 years. I knew him when I was in college briefly, and we kind of stayed in contact, off and on. He was a lawyer in New York, working on the management side, labor relations, and I'm in Pittsburgh, I might say, and. It was just our relationship intensified when he was picked to be the executive director of the National Hockey League Players Association. And at that time, I was an executive vice president along with, Doug Wilson, Bobby Smith, Mike Gartner, and Brian Trottier. And we had a very tumultuous players meeting in Florida in 1989. And, coming out of that, the players had decided they wanted to move another direction. And I had no idea that Bob was in the running or was the finalist. Or the only time I heard about it was when he walked in the room and they announced that he was the new executive director. We had set up a search committee from players, and they hired, I think it was Price Waterhouse. But it was really a great moment in the Players Association history because what they were trying to do wasn't right. Allan Eagleson was Allan Eagleson. Everybody knew Allan Eagleson. He had multiple hats and all that. That's old news. But not unlike Ted Lindsay, right? Ted Lindsay said, "Hey, it should be better, right? I want to make it better." Right. And it was a player deciding. And that's where it was in 67, I think, with Pulford and Bobby Bond and Eagleson. And then when Goodenow came along, it was that stream of consciousness, players deciding for themselves that, we want to improve the terms and conditions under which we work. And Bob was, the absolute perfect pick. At that moment. And what I was really proud about is we had a real division within the players, and we had the executive board, executive committee, and, Florida was, just a gong show for 4 days. But coming out of that, we're very united in moving forward. And Bob, from that moment, Bob and I were probably closest in those next 4 years, right? Two of my last 2 years playing, and then a couple of years into law school and all of that. And, Bob was he was a good mentor. I mean, one of the great things that I had happen in my career was I had, coaches who, helped me immensely, from the time I was 15 years old. I don't think that I ever had a misstep. I had players like Pat Stapleton and Rick Dudley, the same thing. And Bob, as I transitioned out of hockey, that was sort of our relationship at another level, right? Even though it was within the context of hockey. So I have a lot of respect and admiration for Bob. It's just, we would talk, more sporadically over the last few years, but he was really, somebody that was a lot of fun to be around. He's smart, he's intuitive. He would challenge you, right? I mean, every phone call was a fencing match. So I just got a lot from Bob. It was a great relationship.
So when Bob took over the NHLPA, tell us about the offices. What was the NHLPA when Bob took it over?
Yeah, the PA was 60% of Allan Eagleson as the leader, Sam Simpson full-time, and an assistant. That was it. And then there was a few people on the, that were managing, benefits and things of that nature. But the PA was essentially 1.5 people. And then when Bob took over.
And Bob told me that his first office was basically Eagleson gave him a broom closet in his law offices on Maitland Avenue in Toronto.
Right. It wasn't a closet in the figurative term. It was literally a closet. So Allan, in 89, we had that moment. Allan came under a lot of heat. And, really a pivotal moment was Ed Garvey, who was trying to take over as the interim, as he did in the NFL, accused Eagleson of suppressing the salary disclosure, which, I tabled it every year, and every year of 42 players, it was 39-3 against. Players didn't want it out there, and it was like that every year. So, so I threw that on the table. Ed said, well, you couldn't do it even if you wanted to, because the league won't let you, or Allan won't let you. And I said, Ed, I made $440,000 last year. There's my contract. What did these guys make? That's salary disclosure. Simple. We all have our contracts. So that blew up the meeting, right? Because that was what he was going after. But it was very clear to me that Allan, we needed to replace Allan. Allan, if it was a vote, he won a vote of a non-confidence vote. You know, he survived that, but barely. And that was torturous. But he wasn't going to go easily, right? I mean, he was there at the beginning. And so Bob had to fight through that. But that's why Bob was the perfect person to take on that role. Bob was tough as nails, right? He just didn't care. And he knew what right is right, wrong is wrong. You know, he's as black and white as you're going to get. He's had a terrifically strong ethical cord, and he could survive that. But Allan wasn't going to go easily, and Bob, you know, wasn't going away. And eventually, you know, the players wanted that to happen. Again, common theme, players making a decision for themselves. And, you know, that's what happened. And when Bob took over, you know, he didn't go there with the idea, I'm going to be the executive director. I'm going to figure out what to do. He went there with a plan from the beginning. And that's what made him a great leader.
And let's talk about that plan, because after Bob took over, fast forward to 1992, you're an executive vice president of the NHLPA as a player. You mentioned some of the other player leaders. You guys did something that has never been done in the history of hockey. The NHL players went on strike 10 days before the end of the regular season and started the playoffs. Tell us about that.
Well, you know, it's kind of a fog in terms of the back and forth, because we're in the middle of the season. The precursor to that is the collective bargaining agreement ended, as it does, September 15th of that year, 91-92 season. The league elected to continue playing, notwithstanding and negotiating. And Bob knew that when it got to the playoffs, he was going to, you know, it wasn't that he was looking for a strike, but he wasn't going to pass up that moment if it came to that. So, you know, we're all, you know, obviously playing. So you're in and out of the negotiations, and there wasn't a scheme of things to negotiate about, right? It wasn't a salary cap, no salary cap. It wasn't that deep, right? So, in the middle of that year, I ruptured 2 discs in my back. So my career is now over. I know my career is done, and I'm 36, and you know that's it. But you know, we're continuing. I remember going to Toronto for a negotiating session with David Poile, who's the general manager of Washington, where I'm playing, and we're in the car, you know, going from the airport to the negotiating session, talking about, you know, the negotiations, right? And I mean, it was just so surreal. So we get to a point where I think there's going to be a deal, right? It's 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. I think we're at the Sutton Hotel in Toronto, and we stepped out. There was Goodenow, myself, I think Bob Riley was there, maybe John McCambridge, another lawyer, Ed Snyder, Bill Wirtz, and John Ziegler. And we've been at it all day. My back is screaming. I can't sit down. Here's what I did. I went over and laid down there was a universal gym, because that's where we went into. We caucused in the gym, and there was a universal with a incline bench on it. And I could get some relief lying sort of in this 45-degree angle. And Goodenow's looking at me like, what are you doing? And I said, I can't stand up anymore or sit down. So I think we got a deal done, or they're going in that direction. And Bob blows up and walks out of the room. And I've got to peel myself off this bench. And what it came down to was paragraph, I think it's 8 in the standard player agreement, would say, name it. It's essentially name, image, and likeness. And the league has said, we own that. You sign a contract, we own your name forever. And that's what the strike was about, just that. But Bob knew, again, he had a plan. He knew that if you lost that, you'd never raise any money to fight the real fight, right? And whatever that's going to be. You had to have capital to withstand leverage. And so because
the PA basically had no money. The PA had no money.
Zero. Nothing.
It had no money to rent offices, no money to hire staff. I mean, the PA may have had, $100,000 in the bank, maximum.
That's right. So that from that, then Bob quickly pivoted, went to the top players in the league at that time who had these little deals with Starter and some of these other equipment companies. And he got them to fold their, marketing money, 25 grand, 50 grand, whatever it was, which is pretty decent money back then, right? For that stuff. And he got, they all folded, they gave that money to the Players Association, Gratz, Brett Hall, whoever else, right? And then from that, he took it and we took the trading card revenue, exploded with Upper Deck. They started to make a premium card. And then it just rolled out from there that we actually had, some currency to do things as a Players Association, hire staff and so on and so forth. So it was, it was 10 days from that hotel, from the Sutton Hotel. We went back we were staying at the Marriott Eaton Center. And we actually couldn't believe it, right? Like hockey players pulling a strike 10 days before the playoffs and trashing it. That's not our first thought. So there was Mike Gartner, Doug Wilson, and I were in the lobby. They're vacuuming under our feet. We got to pick our feet up and we're just staring at each other in this triangular, two on a couch, one in a chair. And what are we going to do? Right? We know what Bob wants to do, but what are we going to do? Allan, what do you want to do? I don't know. Adam, what do you think we should do? Adam, Mike, what do you think we should? It just went around and around and around. Like we knew what we had to do. We just had to sit there and ask each other, what are we going to do enough times so we had the courage to go and do what we had to do? That was it. We didn't ever come to a consensus conclusion or decision. We just looked at each other for 30 minutes and then went to bed and got up and flew home and had a player meeting and just said, we're going to go on strike. I can remember sitting there in Washington saying, this is what's going down. This is why it's important. And, the vote, I think, was like remarkably overwhelming. There's a handful of dissents, something like that. So
there is a whiteboard. There is a whiteboard to this day in the NHLPA offices with Bob's handwriting,
right?
With the vote total, for and against, and it's still there with Bob's handwriting. Yeah,
that's right. So anyway. That was, but it was the right thing to do. I mean, that was just absolutely, there's no debating that, right? There's just literally no debating who owns my name. I mean, come on. So that was the foundational moment, right? So now Bob has to get down to really what his vision was. And he was, subsequent to that at a, World Championships in Europe, Vienna, I don't know, we can't remember. And as the story goes, he was with 3-4 general managers, and they're all really trying, because this strike thing, this was really not it was a thing, right? And then, of course, the league moved and hired Gary, and everybody's trying to figure out where Bob's head is at, right? I guess, right? And Bob told them, and this was his vision. He said, if the players play long enough, right, they're good enough, they need to be able to retire with financial security, lifetime financial security. So at that time, the famous, he had an economist come in and he presented his economic model right, of the NHL. And within the economic model, he had a triangle, and he said any economic model is this triangle of labor, and you're going to have the high performers, mid-tier, and a lower tier. And it should all be shaded in. And he drew a line near the bottom and put 200 off the corner. And he said 95% of the players make 200,000 or less. And then he hit a few dots above it, and he called it the Stars over Kansas was the labor market in the NHL. And he said this should, you should fill that in. And so, there was that level of education, right? It wasn't fist pounding. And this was an intelligent, articulated position that, everything was suppressed at that point. So that led to 94. And, at that time,
now in the interim, it was perceived by everybody in the hockey world that the players, the PA, Bob Goodenow, won the fight in 92 because you came out with your NIL rights. A group licensing program in the NHLPA was created that started bringing in a lot of money. Bob started building a real union for the first time for the players with offices and staff and fax machines and all the things you need to build a union. And the NHL quietly got rid of, or maybe not so quietly, John Ziegler, their president, and went to look for a commissioner to come in to represent the owners in what they perceive to be a looming fight coming up in 94 in the next CBA.
Yes. And of course, at the NBA, they were going to go after a salary cap, right? That's what they hired, Gary to get. So, but you're quite right. Bob quickly moved to generate a licensing division. He hired for that, and he, it was a business. The core was labor relations, but he understood that he needed to develop a business plan that would fund the labor relations, right, or their fight in labor relations. So, he was, 2 steps ahead all the time. Right. But he really, the education to the players was significant. I was sat on a licensing committee as well. Right. That was an annual event where, I can remember EA Sports at the very beginning. Right. With, presenting and filming some players for their original games. And so, it was cutting edge. Bob loved technology. He was so far ahead of the curve on the utilization of technology and communications. Like when I was in law school, I had, we had an email system, right? It was, housed in, I had dial in, it took forever, but I mean, it was that level of Bob had, offices at home. I mean, he was never unreachable, right? So those are the things that Bob did. And, it was, it really started to build, a foundation and things that players, we're proud of. And, but it wasn't that we're doing this because I want to do this. It's Allan, it's the way we would manage our clients. This is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. Here's the other things you can do. This is why you can't do that. Right. And you educate them and you're giving them real advice. So at the World Championships, when he told the general managers that, against the backdrop of most of the guys making $200,000 or less, right? This is almost inconceivable, right? And it had started to drift a little bit north of that. But by the end of 95, 96, I mean, we're talking about an average league salary of $572, right? And then within 5 years, 6 years, I think the average is $1 million, cresting $1 million. Players are making $10 million, $9 million, and to put that in context, in 94, we had, the salary cap, introduction, all that. the Boston Bruins' total team salary was $10 million. There was only 2 teams above 20, the Rangers and the Red Wings. And most everybody's Boston wasn't the lowest team, right? So that's what we were dealing with. And Bob coming up with this, no, these guys are going to make enough money that they're going to have lifetime financial security. I mean, if they've got to play their cards right, they've got to invest properly, they've got to do all those things. That's called a vision, right? And it's not in a mythical, spiritual way. He had a game plan and he executed on it. And that's the most important part. He executed on it. And he really saw what the NHL could be.
And what you did is when you retired from the NHL, you went to law school and became a lawyer and also associate counsel at the NHLPA. So you're one of the guys with Bob. There's only a few associate counsels in the office that are planning for and then managing through a half season 94-95 lockout where new commissioner Gary Bettman wants one thing over and above everything else. It's why the NHL shut down. He wanted a salary cap. And he was the godfather of the salary cap in the NBA. That's why they brought him. The owners brought him to the NHL. And the ultimate result in January 1995, the owners blinked and you got the NHLPA, Bob, the players, got a CBA with no salary cap. That included unrestricted free agency, salary arbitration, and many other things that the players never had before.
Yeah, I mean, that was the outcome. And in 94, the opening salvo from the league in September was we're locked out and our last best offer is you have no benefits, not pension, life insurance, or health insurance, per diem. I mean, they just wiped you got nothing. So, I mean, the players were, this was a real fight, but Bob had told them this is what's going to happen. It wasn't a surprise. So it didn't matter what came of it. They just, you have to endure it. Now, it wasn't easy, and there were moments of wobble, as there always is. And when Bob went to New York in January, and they eventually got a deal, and it didn't include a salary cap, I'm guessing, right, that not guessing. I know that, Gary was new to the ownership level, and the ownership had teams that wanted to play and teams that didn't want to play. And, it was a majority vote, right? So he wasn't in his strongest position either. So I've always looked at that. That was a stalemate, just a stalemate. Right. But it was a stalemate that inured to the benefit of the players because of expansion, and the Olympics pushed it out to be a 10-year deal. And the 10 years set that foundation for the players, even with all the givebacks, right? The foundation was so strong that they, the players have continued to do well, and they continued to be able to gain financial security because they need it, right? When you're 36 and you have to change directions and you have only been a hockey player, not so easy, right? Not so easy.
So, Mike, tell us what was going on around the end of the 94-95 lockout. You said it was a stalemate. What was your opinion of where the players were at that time? Unification with the gains made at the bargaining table, and player salaries in general.
The players, through that September to December moment, a strong coming together of players. Marty McSorley, for one, was outstanding. He's in Edmonton. He's calling the PA at 10 o'clock at night. And he's adamant, right? take a salary cap. Don't you take a salary cap. Right. And, Marty McSorley screaming at you. You're like, okay, we're not going to take a salary cap. That's the last thing we're going to do now. So, and then, we had a small group meeting, maybe about 40 players and a bunch of lawyers. And Stu Grimson stands up, right? Doesn't put up his hand, just stood up. And when Stu stands up and you're sitting down, you notice him. And he turned around, and nobody really knew Stu other than, punch your lights out. But, he stood around, he looked at the players, not to the lawyers. And he said, fellas, we have to understand that they're not doing this because they think they're right. They're doing it because they think they can. And I'm just telling you, there's just no more profound moment it was, how hockey players are going to react to that? That's a face wash, right? I mean, the level in that building, in that room it wasn't militant. It was like, that's right. They're not going to do that. Right? I mean, it was really a remarkable statement. And you knew it was a remarkable statement because all the lawyers were scratching it down on their notepads. It was really that profound. And then there was another moment where Mark Messier decides that he's going to hold an impromptu news conference press conference in New York. Didn't call Bob, didn't tell Bob, right? No one knew. It was just like we found out that, there's a press conference in New York, and, we don't know what the hell he's going to say, right? Because Mark wasn't really that involved or at all, in meetings and things of that nature. So it was essentially press conference is players are right, owners are wrong. That's it. Thanks for coming. It was just, I'm Mark Messier, and I'm telling you, right? We're right, and they're wrong. Okay.
There was a story going around. There's a story going around about a player during CBA negotiations, and he was getting up and leaving the conference room, and Gary got up to shake his hand. And the player wouldn't shake his hand and said something to Gary that just derailed the entire meeting. Do you remember that?
Yeah. I certainly do. Because Gary, like Bob, was very respectful of the players. Like in the office, Bob would yell at Ian Pulver all the time, right? Young lawyer, and he would never yell at me or any of the players. He just did. And it still rankles Ian to this day, right? But it was kind of just, there's that thing about, these other, anyway. So Gary got up to shake hands because we were going to training camp. And, he looked at Gary. He had his books in his right hand, so he couldn't. He quickly got to the door and he opened the door with his left hand. Gary came there. And I mean, listen, it was not a very respectful thing to do, but we were not in the business of being respectful at that moment. We were just about to get locked out. And he looked at Gary, but he was very sincere. And he said, Gary, in our game, we shake hands after the series is over. I'd be honored to shake your hand when this is over. I mean, another showstopper. Right? Another showstopper. So these are the players that are coming up with this stuff on their own. Nobody prompted them. So it wasn't being snotty, right? Or cynical. It was actually quite sincere. Everybody that said something was very sincere. And even, ironically, as it turned out, in another meeting, negotiating session, we had an amphitheater of players behind us and the other side. And, Gary's trying to explain the cap economic model and what's going on in hockey. And he made the mistake of saying, ridiculing St. Louis because they'd spent all this money and they didn't improve their team at all, or they didn't improve much in the standings. So he was trying to talk about cost containment and blah, 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 whatever that was. I say blah, blah, blah because I can't remember it all. But the part I do remember is, and the conversation quickly moved past that. And Brendan Shanahan stood up and said, excuse me, just like that. Excuse me, I want to go back here. Gary, I play for the St. Louis Blues and I'm proud to play for them. I don't appreciate you talking about our hockey club like that. Right. And then he went on to explain, they had injury, whatever. But again, right. You have to appreciate no one's prompting these hockey players. Right. So I don't know what management thought of these guys, but these are intelligent people. Right. But that believed in what, not believed. They were committed to where this was going and why it was going in the direction they wanted to go in. And that only comes because leader at the top spends the time to educate the players so that they understand all the intended facts and circumstances. And it was nothing more than that. At the end of the day, Bob was sent to New York, and the players wanted the season to play. Right? They were being very pragmatic about everything. And, as I said, I don't, Gary did not have his strongest position. He did in 04-05. He had a super majority, and that's essentially a veto power. 8 clubs or whatever it is can stop everybody else from playing. So if you get 8 on your side, you win in terms of controlling, ownership and the players, there's 700. So it's a more daunting task, but going to New York and coming out with what he came out with, and within that, we still had, and this was a key component. Yes, we got salary arbitration, and it was meaningful salary arbitration. The Boston Bruins goal judge could no longer be the arbitrator, which is actually what happened. The club could not excuse the player from the salary arbitration hearing when the GM was going to testify and call the player everything in the world but a hockey player, right? Which would happen. So now it was a more level playing field. And, we'll follow up to that. The original salary arbitrations, the players got pounded more than they won. So
the original under that salary arbitration, there's a famous story. Doug and the arbitrations actually took place during the season. And Doug Gilmour was playing for Calgary. He's on the ice in the pregame warmup, and he looks up in the owner GM's box, and there's his owner, his GM, and the arbitrator, who's going to hear his case the next day, sitting together, having a beer. That's how rigged the system was before 94.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was even difficult to make some headway after that. I mean, it's a reasonably fair process. It follows the market. It obviously never logically, it does not set the market. By definition, it follows the market because you're using comparable players that are already in the system and they're similar. Ray Bourque lost because we tried to compare him to the best players in the league, which he was. And the arbitrator came back and said, no, he's a defenseman. You can only compare him to the best defenseman in the league. We didn't agree with that, but we lost that hearing. Of course, Harry Sinden, being sly as he was a sharp guy, right? He went and ripped up the arbitration award and renegotiated the contract immediately, right? I mean, Ray Bourque is, he's an all-star every year, and not just the all-star team, right? We got a level playing field. That's all I'll say. And with that, we also retained the qualifying offer, most importantly, because free agency was still 31. It was, drafted at 18 after 13 years. You get the 13 years out of the best players. But the qualifying offer was critical because it was a percentage for players below the average So as the average moved up, because contracts moved up, salary arbitration moved up, more players got the 10 or 15% bump. The QO, can't remember what it was, but everything pushed it up. And that meant more players fell under it, the average league salary. So more players would get the automatic qualifying offer increase. So there was a lot of pressure in every direction, both from the guys at the top, right? By the turn of the century, they're making 10 million. Salary arbitration is we're winning because teams are negotiating for players and willingly signing them to a number that was beneficial in most instances. And qualifying offers pushed it forward. And then we had a 10-year run up, to develop the market, so that by 04-05, we had that economic labor market where everything was filled in. The triangle was completely filled in. We still had a lower tier, we had a mid tier, we had the upper tier, and that was Bob's goal, his objective.
And by 2004, 2005, the NHL average league salary had risen to $1.83 million. Yeah. And that was a testament to Bob's vision back in 1991 when he took over the PA.
Yeah. Like I said, he came there, he knew exactly what he wanted to do and achieve and how he was going to do it. And I've always said this, you have to, with expansion, to be balanced, we got to bring Gary into the conversation. The two of them, Bob Goodenow started it with Gary Bettman. They dragged the NHL into the 21st century. That's just what they did, right? Before that, when I started my career and right through 92, right, my whole career, right, it was always about, our negotiating sessions were with the owners. We'd have lunch with them or dinner with them. Where I'm with Bill Wirtz and Ed Snyder a lot, right? And Bill, he just said, Mike, we've had owned arenas, and it's all about pricing your house. Hockey was a gate-driven and sport for revenue, and that's all they saw. That's all they saw. There was no marketing. We had 6 Sutter brothers playing in the NHL. 6, right? Baseball has the Alou brothers, 3, right? I mean, who's got 4? I don't know. We had 6 Sutters, right? You can't market that. Come on, right? So it was just, the market was there. The elasticity of demand for ticket prices was there. Bill Wirtz. He said, Mike, he told me, Mike, 86. My brother, we raised our ticket prices $5 to $25, right? And my brother thinks I'm crazy, something like that, right? So at the end of my career, it was one of maybe 2 games that I played in Chicago where I wasn't actually playing the game. So I'm sitting on the bench, and it might have been the only time. And there was no glass. And I'm sitting here sweating on the guy beside me. He's got a suit on or a jacket, and I asked him in the middle of the game, I said, this is like 5 years later. I said, how much are your tickets here? It was $60. 5 years ago, 25, he was crazy, right? But now it's 60. And, as player salaries increased, right? Ticket prices increasing. The fans can say, okay, we don't like, I appreciate that too. But the fact of the matter is, the elasticity of demand for tickets, the interest in sponsors. When Bob signed, the other thing that people forget is Bob signed Brett Hull in St. Louis to $1 million a year contract, something like that, or more.
When he was an agent before becoming head of the PA.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
When he signed Brett to $1 million, I played in St. Louis, right? It legitimized the game of hockey. As crazy as that sound, it was like, oh, you're paying somebody $1 million. It's got to be, right? Like St. Louis always had its cult following, right? It was really, it had a lot of roots in Montreal. A lot of players came from Montreal in the expansion, but it was a niche market with the baseball Cardinals being everything. And then they had the football Cardinals, but it legitimized hockey. It really did. And so as everything, like anything, if it's progressive and it moves forward it forces people to be more efficient, to find better ways of doing things, to find other revenue streams. All of that genesis, right? That watershed is Bob Goodenow. You can't argue it any other way. He was there before Gary. Gary's done his thing, right? I'm not taking anything away from, the league and all of that. But that was Bob. That Bob knew it, right? He intuitively understood that this is a bigger business than what it should be, right? We've always talked about internationally played, the interest, the Canada Cups, now foreign A's, whatever we do, right? It's a legitimate sport, right? And now we're really seeing that. It's accelerated since the pandemic. So, that's what I say is that, I don't rate people. I know past generations are difficult to compare when we're talking about athletes. Athletes that have changed the game, certainly Gordie Howe, Bobby Orr, Wayne Gretzky, Wayne going to LA, critical moment for U.S. hockey, all heavy contributors. But Bob is one of and I'm talking in the top probably 5, right? One of the most influential people in the history of the National Hockey League. Just that simple. You can argue that one all day long. I'll take that side against anything people want to do, because not only do the players make a lot of money, so did all the coaches and the GMs and the league office. Everybody has made more money since the players have made more money. It's a big business, right? Big business. It's a small business in the scheme of things in the world, but it's now a $7 billion business. So it's
now we've all been you and I have received calls from Bob after he resigned from the PA, and sometimes I would get off the phone with him and start making notes of some of the things that he had said, because they were so memorable and so hilarious and so pointed. We've referred to them as Bob's rants, but everything he would quote unquote rant about, he was right. He was right. Yeah. He had a particular name for agents after 2004, 2005. We weren't agents anymore. We were allocators. And he never uttered the word agents anymore. He just, even talking to me and talking to you, he called us allocators.
I know. He had a hard time. He didn't spit it out at me very often, right? But Bob was, but he's right? It's a pie, right? You have a salary cap. You only have so many dollars, right? You're not going to exceed it. You can't expand it and contract it. You have to pay to a certain number, right? So it's an artificial market. And within that artificial market, you're going to slice the pie up. You're going to allocate the piece of pie to each of your children. That's what you're doing. And he didn't like that. And of course, the irony of it, right, is that's about as anti-capitalistic as you're going to get, right? We're just going to artificially suppress it, and we're going to just divvy it up as best we can. And as opposed to, hey, we've got a chance to win the Stanley Cup. We're going to expand our roster, right? We're going to expand our spend, and we're going to try to win. And we're going to leverage that, into, a benefit to our franchise. And when we lose those players, we're going to shrink it again. We're going to run this business in that fashion. So now it becomes very staid. All the, any nuance that you get to it, they want to plug that gap. They don't want the flexibility to negotiate contracts. Bonuses went out, right? They took out bonuses and it converted it. That was the Gabrick, right? Okay, we don't have any bonuses, so we'll just pay them more guaranteed money. I never really understood that, right? The bonuses are variable compensation, and you exchanged variable for fixed. But okay, right? That's, but it was an economic model. And the conversation I had with Bob was, Bob, you also have to look at expanding game and revenue, and how many people in the middle are making more, even though it's taken 20 years for the players to get back to where they were in 2000, 2001, right. 2002.
20
right?
years.
It's 20 years for the top players to get to that level. And that was Bob's point to it. But, there was again, it's just a different economic model, and just one, the salary cap that Bob didn't agree with. And that was, in 04, 05. And, he gets removed. Again, as a player, I've always said that the Players Association decisions mostly have been at least spearheaded by players, right? Now, we liked what Ted Lindsay had to say, and we sure loved what Beast McCrimmon had to say, because he was another guy in 94, 95 that was a stalwart for the players. I mean, one of the most honorable individuals I have ever met in the game. And
talk about what he said to the players in 94, 95 in a room when there were some players starting to waver. He stood up? What did he say?
Yeah, well, at that time, Brad was going to make, I think it was his high water mark was that year, right? The 94, 95. I'm pretty sure that's where it was, or close to that. So, and it was considerably more. He was a guy that was suppressed. And you have to, Brad McCrimmon, for all the, fans out there that don't know his career, you can look up the years he played in Philly with Mark Howe as the defense partner. They were like plus 160 or something like that in one season. That's not their cumulative. That was 1 year, right? So Brad was a great player. And, he finally got to a point where he was, I don't know what he was making at that point, 700 or something like that. And he stood up literally and did an all in before we understood or even played Texas Hold'em. And he just said, I put my salary all in, something like that, right? I stand up, no cap. And if you guys take a cap next year when I'm out of the game, I'm going to come back and kill you all, right? And we're looking at figuratively, right? He's just being figurative, isn't he? Really? Just figurative? And I don't know, maybe. But I mean, that was the level of intensity that hockey players bring, right? And he was just making a point that I'm doing this because I believe in it. This is how much I believe in it. This is my best earning year. And I say no cap. And, a lot of people don't agree with that. They're going to say, well, you never get that money back. And I go, sure. Okay. Yeah, I know. And that was Bob's other thing. You're going to get in a negotiation. You're going to think with your pocketbook you've lost, right? And you have to be able, you've got to think bigger. Now you can look at it in our, transactional world that we live in today. People say, well, they're dumb. That's stupid. You should, you give up money. And we don't have enough time to argue that one today, but I always said this, maybe you're right, but you have to respect the integrity, right? I mean, how do you not respect that? Right?
100%.
It's called selfless, not selfish, right? I'm not taking for me. That's what I'm going to do. This is my decision. And you have to respect that, even if you don't understand it. And the players were never asking you to understand it, right? Just to respect it. So those guys, it wasn't that it was a fight that we were this league and the players. I'm just telling you how the players reacted in that moment and through that time from 1992 through 1995, right? Really, memorable moment for me, right? Because that's when the character of people when they're faced with something like that. Who's going to stand up and who's going to fold? Right. And how do they do their thinking? And, I'm not going to be critical of 04, 05. I didn't agree with it. I thought it put the players in a hole. Right. There's a lot of money in the game. So it's not, that's that. I really didn't understand, after losing a season, why they made the decision. I'm okay with the decision they made because, as I said before, we made our decision. Right? Because we were playing at that time. It was ours to make. It was theirs to make at that time. They did it for whatever reasons they decided they had to. But to do it in April, that violates all of the basic tenets of negotiating, right? Take all the time that's afforded you, no false deadlines, right? You don't know what the other side's going to do, right? And, you just have to be uncomfortable, right? You have to become comfortable in an uncomfortable environment, right? You just have to, you've got to grin and bear it. And they didn't. They folded in April, and they got rid of Bob. And I didn't understand that at all. But for Bob's end of it, was he hurt? Of course he was hurt, right? Was he, pissed off about it? Yeah, why not, right? Look at what he did. But we also knew this, right? And I will always remember this. So Reggie Jackson gets elected to the Hall of Fame, as he should be. And he thanks George Steinbrenner. It's like, Reggie, George Steinbrenner. Yeah, I get it. How about Marvin Miller?
Marvin Miller.
Yes.
How about Marvin Miller? Let me give you independent grievance arbitration equals free agency. That's why you got your money, right? George would have been happy to pay you a third of that, right? So, but that's the world. Right? That's the world, right? Hey, you want to stay in the game. If you want to stay in the game, that's the line players walk. And that's why, Bob's not going to be in the Hall of Fame. Bob wasn't doing it to get in the Hall of Fame, but as a builder, like I said, one of the most influential individuals in the history of the National Hockey League. And that's just indisputable.
I've never asked, you and I have worked very closely together in Octagon hockey since 2004. And I've never asked you this question before. Did you, and do you think other players who played in your era felt let down by the players in 04, 05, who you guys forged a trail and you guys helped put the NHL and NHL players on the map, on and off the ice, and here in 04, 05, faced with their time to stand their ground, they folded. Did you feel let down by that?
Not me personally. I can't speak for a lot of other guys. I mean, I stand by that, right? It's their decision to make. It's their game. The players who are playing in the National Hockey League, when they're playing in the National Hockey League, the game is theirs. It's not ours. We made our decisions. They make their decisions. And I have no problem with it. But for me, it was the timing of it was abysmal, right? The season's gone. You don't get another check until October. Why then? And Bob was out the door going to the World Championships. And, he to me, he had the upper hand. And the players gave it away. They just panicked. Now, there was no doubt there's a lot of subterfuge going on, right? Now, I'm not there at this point. I'm now, I'm an agent, so I'm not involved at all. So that was, but I know, within our community, Allan, a lot of hand wringing and people on our side who were losing money, and they were, it was not good. Right. And, that's another, that would have to be carefully vetted because, proof being a long time ago and the, defamation laws. But, it's what was going on inside the Players Association. For me, my advice to Bob was, and this is the part that, I look at it and said, I should have made that point harder, right? I thought Bob should have had more of a cocoon around him. He went the other way, more people. I told him he should have had the agents stand up and be a part of it, which, he didn't do. And Bob relied on, technology to communicate with the players. Players lost the whole season, right? That's no joke. That's when, the moment where Allan joined Octagon and I was, our company, we never blinked, right? Nobody lost. Well, we lost a little bit of money, right? We took a little bit of a haircut individually because there's zero revenue and we knew it, but the administrative people, stuff like that. Octagon hung in with us and got us through that year. And, if you've got that financial security, it makes it easier, right? If you own the business and, you're going to have to make that decision whether, you want this over and you just want to get back to earning something. And I know that there was a lot of that in the agent world. And that may be something that Bob underestimated, is the impact that the agents would have in undermining with the players. And I know that was happening too. So it was, it's an unfortunate moment. But the players came out of that with 57% of the revenue. Of course, the next round in 12-13, it went down to 50. And just to give you a concept of that delta, between 13 and 19, the start of the pandemic, that 7% was worth about $2 billion to the owner. So that was $2 billion coming out of the players. And then 57 was the league's number. That's their deal. 57 was their deal. They wanted 57 and locked the players out for a whole year to get 57. And then they came back and said, okay, now we need 50. Well, that may well be, right? Or not. But the fact of the matter is that was worth about $2 billion to the owners out of the players' pocket.
And actually about about $4 billion if we go to today.
If we go today, it's exactly the number that I gave a colleague today. $4 billion.
Yeah. $4 billion.
That's so we're not talking about chump change here. This is real negotiation, and the negotiation in a CBA, which Bob totally understood, right? One leads to the next, just like a contract for a player. Whatever he signs sets him up for the next one, and that's the way of the world. And once it slides, right, it doesn't stop sliding, right? The players gave up $2 billion there. They paid $1 billion in losses for the pandemic, for the money they got. They could have shut the league down in 2021, but it's what they've got now. It's every time they've gone to a negotiating table since 2004, 2005, the players have come out with less every time. Right. So
yeah,
it's like any body of water, right? It doesn't, rarely is it stagnant. It's either moving forward or moving backwards. Right. So anyway, it's their decision to make. Right. If I had, these are the rules. What are the rules? We're looking for the rules, to advise players on it. The other guys, I don't know what they would say. I would think that they would disagree with it, but I know what it's like to sit in that room and to make those decisions and what it feels like and the pressure and they have to make a decision, right? I can't make it for them.
Adam?
Am I allowed to ask what, this is going to put you both in a tough spot. Do you feel that trend continued with this negotiation?
Well, I'll answer that because Allan's got enough arrows in him from, Did it continue? Sure, it continued, right? The max contract's now 7 years, right? Or will be.
Yeah.
And if you go someplace, it's 6. What is that all about? Like, why is that something that's important, right? I can say that if it's a 23-year-old, the team should want 8 years, actually 10, if we're really counting, right? Because the guy's that good. Why now? I think it's going to put a lot of pressure. I think you don't know how these things. There's always unintended consequences, and I think you can't get to 8 years. So the question is going to be: do I need 8 years? Why am I signing 8 years anyway? Why don't I just get on my entry level and do 2 and then maybe do 2 more or 3? But I'm going to get closer and closer to 25 or 27, wherever I'm going to come out as a UFA. So I think the shorter contract will get players to focus on when do I become a free agent, right? Like and that may well, with 32 teams in the way it's set up right now, I think that's more pressure on the clubs. Controlling here, I'll give you another Bill Wirtz about free agency. So he's talking to me one night, and he goes, he's got his hand out like this. I'll show you what it is. And he's got a drink in his hand because it's a social event. And he points to his hand. He goes, Mike, we're talking about free agency. Only so many marbles to play the game. We only have so many marbles. I was a marble. We don't give away our marbles. Yes, that's right. That's exactly right. The name of the game is to control your assets. That's what your players are, right? And you want them, like I said, 6 years, 10 years. I want you for 10 years, right? The right guy, right? If you got, the right players they're playing the game, to win, right? And they're not going to take the money and go home. That's not what hockey's all about. So anyway, I think in that sense, the players are, it's a constant, deferred. Can't do deferred. I don't believe in deferred, but in some instances, deferred works, right? Mm-hmm. It works. And for a variety of reasons, it has to be the right thing. Playoff roster, right? The salary cap for the playoff roster. Okay. Some teams took advantage of it because they could put a team on the ice that was greater than the roster on that. But now, they've gone the other way. I think it's going to show that it's going to work out and that teams are not going to have the flexibility, that they'll have a hard time, getting to, we'll see how that works out. Right. I think that the name of the game is, to win, you have to have the flexibility to maneuver. And right now you're taking away everybody's ability to maneuver, and mostly general managers. So they can't do their job, right? You have to be able to adjust. And it's exceptionally difficult right now for general managers to adjust because, it's a thin player pool. You've got 32 teams. That's a lot. To go to get to 30 and then now 32, that's an incredible strain on the player pool. So, now you're making it more difficult for them to maneuver. I don't agree with it. It's not for me to agree or disagree, but if you ask me, has the trend continued? Yes, it's become more restrictive. That's what a cap is. It's restriction. And we've just been more and more restrictive in how we manage it. Like, why can't you trade cap and cash at a different percentage? Why not? Why not? If the Toronto Maple Leafs will pay the cash because they've got the revenue to do it, and they're going to slough off some of their cap space, why is that a problem, right? The smaller market team, that's an economic advantage to them. Now, does Toronto have an advantage because they might be able to accumulate? Yeah, but they're not the only big team, right? And hockey is you're not buying a championship in hockey. You have to build to a cohesive team. Look at the St. Louis Blues. So I don't
look at the teams. Look at the teams before the salary cap. The top spending teams before the salary cap came in 04-05 struggled to make the playoffs.
Yep.
Yeah. No, that was.
I remember how much money the New York Rangers used to spend, right?
Yeah. Rangers, Detroit. There were teams that were, 75, 80, $85 million payrolls. They couldn't make the playoffs.
Right. And you get, Detroit. Yeah, they got Shannon to go there and Brett Hull at the end of their careers because they wanted to win. Because they had the pieces already. They just had, these guys didn't make a lot of, they weren't blowing it up, but they had, they had the flexibility to do it. They brought back Igor Larionov, right? He was their fourth line center. At the end of his career, he scored a pivotal goal in the finals against Carolina, right? I mean, that's allowing, you have to allow general managers to make good decisions, hockey decisions, not salary cap decisions. When it's all about the salary cap, it only hurts the game.
Yeah.
And that was a big part of Bob's argument. And that was a big part of Bob's argument against the salary cap.
Yeah, because it's all the restrictions, whittle it away. And there's, part of the, like the salary cap rate now is still significantly undervalued, right? It's not 95 this year. And Allan and I have talked about this at length. I will say at the end of the 25-26 hockey season, given the revenue that should come in, or we're expecting to come in, that 95, while it's the cap, right, for purposes of spending for players this year, it will, based on the revenue from 25-26, look more like the midpoint, right? So we should see that the spend on players will be there'll be more money spent under 95.5 than over 95.5, right, in the aggregate. It will be, there'll be zero. I mean, you can't go over 95.5, but the spend will be at around 95.5, pushing up to be a lot of teams in that range. And if you're at the top of the cap, towards the cap, you're going to have escrow loss and all that good stuff. But the revenue will suggest that it's under 95.5 will be closer to the midpoint. So players should not see any escrow loss, all that good stuff. But okay, so the players are going to say, I'm not going to pay 2 or 3%, right, on my and lose it in escrow or 4%. And the original idea in expanding the payroll range is to let everybody negotiate what they can, provide clubs with the flexibility they need, and then everybody give back a small percentage, 5%. Right now, it got out of hand. Pandemic aside, it got to 12. Pandemic, nobody sees that coming, right? Like that's something. That's a unicorn. So, but the idea is when you can't do that, when we're playing 7 million, 8 million under where the cap should be, then teams are compressed. They can't make the moves. It's addition by subtraction, but you're just spinning your wheels. So, is somebody going to win the Stanley Cup? Yes, we know this. 16 teams make the playoffs, 1 win. And it doesn't matter the economic system. What matters is the level of play, right? So parity to mediocrity is not good, right? People love to see dominant teams, and they love to see dominant teams get upset, right? But that's what drives interest, is when you have great players playing, your best players playing in the finals and the semifinals, a team that like St. Louis comes from nowhere to, their last place, and they come and win the Stanley Cup, right? That's the interest in it, but you need the flexibility to be able to execute on that. So there's my 40-minute answer to your question.
I liked it. I liked it very much. I think it's starting. Yeah, it's starting to kind of eke out that not everybody's thrilled about this, but, hey, listen, deal signed, so I guess we get ready for the next one. Allan, do you have any other questions and things that you want to hit on as we kind of wrap up here about Bob Goodenow? Because obviously the effects that he had are still being felt today.
I would just reiterate one thing. It's a point that Mike made. There really is no more impactful figure to the entire game of hockey since he came on the scene with the NHLPA. And as a builder, as someone who truly loved the game, he had a tremendous love of the game. He loved watching hockey. He knew the league, every player across the league. He appreciated it. A few years ago, he and I went to a game together, and it literally was like going to a game with a kid. He was so excited to be watching the game. I think a lot of people who saw the gruff exterior and they didn't appreciate how much a fan of the game of hockey he really was. And if there's anybody not in the Hockey Hall of Fame today who deserves to be in as a builder, it's Bob Goodenow. And while he passed away without being in the Hall, what a great testament to his life and legacy for us to get together and get him into the Hall now.
Yeah, I agree with. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I agree with Allan's Hall of Fame moment, right? I 100% agree with that. The other part that's really important, Bob knew the game, played the game, understood the nuance of the game, appreciated what the players have to do to perform at its highest levels. Remember, the league also wanted to have a branded equipment program. Bob stopped that too, right? He says, no. The guys have to have what they need to play with. We don't force players to use equipment they don't want. This is a subset of the things that he did. But he yes, was a fan. He was a student of the game. I'd say more than a fan. But he had a strong foundation in the game, and he had the utmost respect for the players who played it at its highest levels. That's why he could never yell at us, even if we screwed up in the office. He never saw me as anything other than a hockey player, right? Like, he just couldn't bring himself to do it. Even when he would be so upset on one of his rants at agents, he would get right up to the point, right? And with Allan, he might have crossed over, but he just couldn't. And it always made me laugh, right? Because he wanted to, he just wouldn't do it. But it's a testament to Bob being the right guy at the right time for the players. Because he really, like I said, more than understanding where this game could go and all of that, he just had such a deep respect for the players who played in the National Hockey League, because he played and he wasn't able to play at that level. But instead of being bitter about it or coming up with I coulda, woulda, shoulda, right? He just understood how difficult it is to play a long time in the NHL. And that's why he wanted the players who play at the top and play there for a long time to leave the game with the dignity that financial security delivers. And that's his legacy.
That was Bob, and that's a great way to leave it.
This has been Agent Provocateur with Allan Walsh and Adam Wylde. Follow Allan Walsh on Twitter @WalshA. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts by searching Agent Provocateur and hitting the subscribe button. YouTube.com/SDPN.